I'd like to call to order the special school board business meeting for June 4, 2025. Tiffany, can you please do the roll?
Johnson.
Here.
Brophy.
Here.
Peterson.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Aldridge.
Here.
Valdez.
Here.
Zidek.
Here.
Shania.
Here.
Michelle.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the special school board meeting for June 4. Next on our agenda is item 3, the consideration of the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
The motion by Brophy and a second by Aldridge. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda is the purpose of our meeting tonight, the district financial outlook. And here to present is Dr. Redmond, our superintendent, and our director of finance and operations, Bill Manazzi. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair Smith, and thank you to everyone who's present this evening. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules and being here with us. We've kind of got a three-part setup for our presentation. Bill and I are going to go through a series of slides and share information pertaining to our district's financial outlook. And then we have a designated section for questions and answers. However, and this certainly includes the board as well, if there's something Bill or I are talking about that you go ahead, just like clarity on that point, or maybe for you to go a little bit deeper, kind of raise your hand or back here, cough or something and get our attention. We're happy to do that rather than continuing on and you've got a nagging question. And then the third and final part is a public comment with public comments in regards to this evening's presentation topic, the district financial outlook. So with that, we'll jump right in. The school board in the next few weeks will be determining a plan for the district's financial path forward regarding the challenges facing the school district in fiscal year 27, which is the 26-27 school year. So we're not talking about the coming school year, that starts in September, the 25-26 school year. We're actually talking about the year after next. And we certainly, there are some budget challenges next year. We were able to deal with those with the financial resources on hand for next year. However, our budget becomes imbalanced for the 26-27 school year. And then also, consideration for a plan also needs to be initiated for, fiscal year 28 and beyond. Some of the challenges definitely continue into the following school year, the 27-28 school year. In Minnesota, our state legislature does school funding in a biennium. They're in the process of wrapping up their legislative session this year, which is a funding year, which it will be we will know our funding when they're done for the next 2 school years. Certainly the biennium that follows the fiscal 29 and fiscal 30, the early projections for that are not overly optimistic either. So we're certainly trying to take stock of where we are as a district, where we're heading, and do the best we possibly can in terms of coming up with plans and the school board voting on those and presenting things to the community. I want to jump more or go a little bit deeper into the context of that financial outlook or our financial situation or challenges. And we think a good starting point is to say this is not a Shakopee problem alone. There are financial challenges in nearly every school district across the state of Minnesota. We highlight on what you can see on the projection behind me and above me, a projection for our 11 comparison districts, the districts in our area that we compare ourselves to in terms of how we operate, the services that we provide. And you can see in nearly all of those districts, all the other 11 have made budget cuts either for this current school year that's wrapping up or for next school year. Many of them are projecting out with budget cuts beyond that. And you can see for those 11 districts, and again, this was self-reported by the districts, things change as time moves on, but at the time of the report, it was a total of $98.5 million in budget cuts across the 11 districts. There is a little note on the bottom in regards to Shakopee. We did do some enrollment where we have decreases in enrollment does, kind of automatically make some adjustments to our expenditures. It decreases some of those, but we have not engaged in large-scale budget cuts either for this current school year that's wrapping up tomorrow or for next school year. And, I think as we've talked about this at school board meetings and other places, leadership team meetings, a lot with Bill Manazzi and other folks doing the finance work in our district, the question really becomes, well, what's going on? And why are all these budgets making really significant budget cuts? And we point to, there's really two major reasons. And the first is driven by inflation. And this, I'm not going to go through every month of this inflation grid, but you can see, looking back into, I believe it's April of 2021, where inflation jumped above 4% and stayed, above that for quite a while and is still, we have some inflationary challenges. But when we look at the inflation compared to, what our school funding has been in that same period, this graphic really tells the story. And the orange line is our general education formula allowance, which in just sort of, regular terms, this is the main source of funding the state gives to school districts in Minnesota. It's a per pupil, amount in state aid. The orange dotted line on this chart shows what we've received in terms of per pupil, and you can see the trend is upwards. However, when you get to 2021, you'll notice the gap between the orange line and the blue line that gap begins to grow in years 22, 23, 24, 25. Well, the blue line is showing what school districts in Minnesota would have got in their basic formula allowance per pupil had that formula allowance kept pace with inflation. It would have been significantly more money for Shakopee and every other school district across the state of Minnesota. Had our state funding kept pace with inflation, which it did not, and that gap between what we've been receiving from the state and what we would have received had it kept pace with inflation has actually grown. That difference has increased between what we're getting and what we would have received had it kept pace with inflation to $795 per pupil each year. That's the number for 2025. And if we were receiving from the state that additional $795 per pupil, that would be providing our school district an additional $6.6 million in annual funding. I continue to look at Bill because he can go super deep on any of these, and he's also, and he'll take it away here in a little bit, but he's got a much deeper understanding of almost all of this than do I. The other key factor that has impacted a lot of school districts in Minnesota, we've talked a lot about this in the last few years in Shakopee and with the other districts in our area, is nearly every school district in the state of Minnesota has seen decreases in student enrollment, primarily driven by lower birth rates across Scott County, across the state of Minnesota, and across much of the United States, and even a fairly good swath of the world. And in Minnesota, our funding is determined or driven by the number of pupils in a school district. So if the number of pupils that we're serving decreases from one year to the next, so does the amount of revenue that we get from the state to serve our students. And you can see that change from fiscal year 21, or the 2021 school year, through the end of the 24-25 school year, this school year. That total decrease is about $8.2 million less in revenue from the state for Shakopee. This is another revenue comparison between us and the 11 comparable districts in our area. We do adjust so that we're truly comparing apples to apples. We assign each school district in this comparison the exact same enrollment as we have in Shakopee. Because with differences in enrollment, there's going to be differences, all the forms of funding shown in this chart are driven by enrollment. So equalizing the enrollment lets us really look at two of the key revenues that we get in Minnesota in addition to state funding. And those are operating levy revenue, let's give that another try, which is paid primarily by local taxpayers, and then something called quality compensation, or QComp, which is primarily used to provide professional development or incentive pay to teachers across the districts. And you can see that when we look at the 11 comparable districts, we're the blue shaded line there. You can see what we get in terms of additional revenue from an operating levy annually in a per pupil format. And then from QComp, which we're the only one of the 11 that does not receive QComp funding. A few years back, the state sort of stopped funding that. We're on that waiting list. We've been on that waiting list for quite a while. It's an arbitrary line. We're below that line. If we were above that line, we would receive QComp funding. We've had an application ready to go, and we're the only one of the 11 districts we compare ourselves to that does not receive that QComp funding. And you can see the difference in additional revenue. If we look at Burnsville and we go to the far right column, each year, because Burnsville has a larger operating levy, Burnsville has a larger operating levy than we do. I think I had this issue at a board meeting about 3 months ago, kind of the dry voice. And they also receive QComp. They actually receive, from this additional funding, $9.8 million every year more than Shakopee. And we just think that's just to help understand our situation. If we go back prior to the year 2021, we did not have an operating levy. Our voters approved that in November of 2021. That moved us from, dead last, number 12 on this list, to number 10 when we look at this comparative analysis. And this is what we've called an anchor spreadsheet. I'm going to turn it over to Bill for more detail, but I'm going to say a couple things about it. The numbers don't necessarily tie out on this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is designed to show 4 different categories of things impacting our school district finances. The primary places where we get our revenue and what that looks like over time, enrollment, employment or employee expenditures, and then categorical, how the Department of Ed has us categorize the expenditures so that we can compare that over time, what areas are growing, how does that growth compare to other areas? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Redmond. And like Dr. Redmond mentioned, this is a great spreadsheet in that it really is aptly named the anchor spreadsheet. It is a way to pull back the curtain and look at our general ledger and our general fund. And so if people that are watching are interested in doing a reconciliation between the expenditures that are shown on the sheet and what's shown in our annual budget reports, I'd be happy to do that. But the reason for removing some of those items is just to get an apples to apples comparison by removing things like operating capital or deferred maintenance type expenditures that may vary from year to year to year. So with that, we can go to the next slide, slide 10. The next 4 slides I have, and it's really a deeper look into our actual revenues and projected revenues, and then actual expenditures and projected expenditures. So on the last sheet, named the anchor spreadsheet, you saw a whole lot of information, both historical and forward-looking from a projection standpoint. And the purpose of these next 4 sheets is just to unpack that a little bit further. And I should mention that everything you're going to see here is in the general fund of our school district. There are other funds, our food service fund, our community services fund, and so on and so forth. What we're really focusing in on here is the general fund, which is by far and away our largest fund in the school district. So starting first with our actual revenues, in a look back period starting in 2020, 2021, and looking forward all the way to 2024-25, which, as Dr. Edmond mentioned, we're not completely done with 24-25 on the sheet named FY25, but at this point we have a pretty good estimate of where we think we will end up with the end of this month being the end of the fiscal year. And so we can look at the main categorical areas in our general fund revenue budget. On the top row there you see our state aid formula allowance. That's really when Dr. Edmond showed that chart that showed the structural imbalance between nominal increases in the state aid formula allowance and increases in the inflation rate. That's really the row that we were referring to. And that is by far and away the largest piece of the pie when it comes to our general fund revenue budget is appropriated by the legislature in the form of the state aid formula allowance. And you can see that we've really received small increases there, an annual percentage increase of 0.61% from the state dating back to 2020-21. The second row is state special education aid, and you can see that the legislature in 2023 made an investment in state special education aid, which was helpful not only to the Shakopee school district, but to every school district in Minnesota that received that additional special education aid revenue from the state. And that has really helped us to this point keep up with increases in special education expenditures in our district. And then referendum revenue, known as the operating levy, as Dr. Edmond mentioned, in November of 2021, our community generously supported an operating levy, and the first year of that levy revenue was in 2022-23. So you can see that was 0 for 21 and 22, and then jumped up to that sum of the question 1 and question 2 in fiscal 23, and has carried forward from there. And then finally, the bottom 2 rows, I don't want to spend a ton of time, our capital projects levy, known as our technology levy, funds a lot of the technology tools and software programs for teachers in the classrooms, and that's tied to changes in the net tax capacity in our taxing district. And you can see that overall that's had a fairly healthy increase, albeit it's tied to technology and technology-related expenditures. And then our compensatory revenue on the bottom is really tied to socioeconomic need, and you can see where that has gone in the last few years. Going from actual revenues then to our projected revenues. And I really think this tells a pretty good story on that structural imbalance, that budget structural imbalance that Dr. Edmond mentioned starting in fiscal 27. So I talked about the first 5 columns. And so really I'm going to focus in on FY26, which is next year's budget, FY27, which is the 2026-27 year, and then fiscal 28, which is obviously the third year in our analysis here. And you can see that the state aid formula allowance, again, the largest funding mechanism, if you look at from fiscal year 2026, where we're budgeted to receive from the state 61.8 million, fast forward that to fiscal year 2028, we're budgeted to receive 61.2 million. So, as was previously mentioned, those increases from the state are certainly helpful, but they are mitigated when they're paid based off of enrollment, and we're in a period of natural decline in student enrollment. And so anytime you look at your largest funding mechanism, and for fiscal 26, 27, and 28, there's a decrease there of $600,000 from 26 to 28. Obviously, that creates some pretty significant budget challenges. And you can kind of see on down the row, special education aid is forecast to increase from fiscal 26 to 28 by $775,000. A couple of these are held constant. The capital projects levy, as I mentioned, which is tied to net tax capacity, is projected to increase about $607,000. And so just doing some quick math here, if we take fiscal 26, 27, and 28 over that 3-year period, and we take the total projected additional new revenue over those 3 years, I'm coming up with $782,000 total, not per year, total over the 3 years. And so you divide that by 3, $260,000 per year additional new revenue forecast over the next 3 years. On a school district budget that's over $100 million, that is just not a sustainable increase in order to keep moving forward. So with that, I'd like to take a look at expenditures. And again, this operates the same way that our revenues operated. We'll look at our actual expenditures, and then on the next slide, our projected expenditures. And so you can see our actual expenditures from fiscal 21 to 25. Our main spending categories are in the bold there. We spend the bulk of our expenditure budget, as you would hope, on elementary and secondary regular instruction. Our budget for this year for elementary and secondary regular instruction is just about $52 million. We also spend a significant portion of our general fund budget on special education instruction. This year the budget for that is $26.4 million. And then under the 700s, titled Pupil Support Services / Transportation, much of that budget is attributed to our contracted transportation service we have with our great transportation partner, Palmer Bus Service as well. So you can kind of see in giving an overview of where from a program standpoint we're spending our general fund budget. And then lastly, moving forward on the next slide, where we're projected to go from an expenditure standpoint. So it's been mentioned in previous meetings that it really holds true, and it's not just true at Shakopee, this is true for all school districts across the state. School districts, as you would expect, are people organizations. And if you look at our expenditure budget, about 80 cents on every dollar that we spend is spent on people. And the vast majority of that is spent on teachers. And so the hard truth about being in a cost containment period or in a period of making budget reductions is it's very, very difficult to do that without impacting people. Obviously, we look at things like transportation, number of buses, bell times, how we route that type of stuff. We look at our utilities, making sure we're efficient in every area of the non-wage and benefit areas of our budget. But it's just very, very difficult to balance a budget without impacting people because school districts are such people-intensive organizations. Those are the slides that I have, and with that, I'll turn it back to, well, actually, you know what? I have one more.
Yeah, but I'm going to interject,
Okay.
and then I'll bring you back. I'm actually going to move us back a slide, because as you were going through the details, I believe those details tell a story. And if you go back to when we were working on the operating levy in 2021, you can see where the most significant increases in expenditures are. And if you remember, we were targeting moving our teachers in terms of salary and benefits and our support staff, moving them towards the middle of those comparable districts. And then we also were, shortening some of the walking distance and bringing back transportation routes. And as well, we were, bringing class sizes back to what they had been prior to budget cuts. Again, the spending increases where they're largest was on purpose and targeted and part of a lot of time and a lot of planning by the school board back in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And I think it also exemplifies that the board and the district leadership did exactly what they said they were going to do in that time period.
Yes, thank you. So with that, we're going to sort of transition to the next part of the presentation, talking about options. And Dr. Edmond mentioned for the 2025-26 school year, which is next school year starting in September, we are projected to remain at 10% fund balance. We've worked very, very hard to get to that mid-range of the school board policy, and we're projected to remain there for next year. So we're really talking about the 2026-2027 school year, which would obviously start in the fall of 2026. So we've talked about 3 options for financial decisions that need to be made for that fiscal 27 school year. One would be budget cuts, so reducing the expenditure side of the ledger alone in order to balance that budget. Option 2 would be the ability to increase revenues. And as we talked about previously, there would not be a way outside of working with our elected officials to increase the state aid formula allowance. Any real revenue increase is going to come in the form of a local effort from the community. Or 3 would be a combination of budget cuts and revenue. In other words, a combination of options 1 and 2.
I'm pausing a little bit on purpose if there's any questions in terms of clarity on anything up to this point. As we talk about the $7 to $9 million budget challenge that exists for the year after next school year, the 26-27 school year, we've begun to work on that with some smaller pieces, but still significant pieces in terms of reducing expenditures. We've talked about it at other board meetings, but we're doing something somewhat unique for school districts in Minnesota. We've contracted with a group, a company called Schoolie Mitchell, and we open up our books and our expenditures across all kinds of different areas in our district to them, and they look for cost savings for us, places where we might be spending more than other school districts on things, and they make their money by finding those cost savings, and we share in the savings that they find, so it's a no-risk approach to us. But to have somebody go through and, they found a few smaller type things to this point. But I think it's worth pointing out that we're always looking at our budgets. We're always trying to scrutinize. One of the most important roles for a superintendent and a director of finance in a school district is to be excellent stewards of the taxpayer, funding that provides services to our students and our community. We've also, we continue to make some adjustments to teacher staffing in other areas in our district due to decreases in enrollment. We have put off hiring for a couple positions where we've looked and said there's a high probability that, for the 26-27 school year, that if we were to hire those positions for next school year, there's a high probability we would have to lay them off just 1 year into their tenure, and have decided that the most prudent course of action is to not do the hiring, even though it was planned or projected. But looking at a different financial outlook, we've decided to save that revenue, not expend that revenue, and think that that's a prudent course of action. And then some of our services, it wasn't primarily to save money, but we've We've done some work in terms of one part of training, which is very good, but also very expensive. We're replacing with what we think is an equivalent form of safety training that saves about $16,000 per year. As we look at the 26-27 school year, the suggestion to the board is that we should strongly consider making at least $3 million in permanent expenditure reductions. Some of that will be we're still projecting decreases in student enrollment. That pace of decrease or declines has slowed some recently. We would also, with fewer students, we always look at reducing the number of bus routes, and I want to be really clear, we're not talking about changing the walking distances with this, but if we have fewer students, it makes sense that we should have fewer total buses bringing our students to and from school. And we do that anytime we have decreases in enrollment. We always analyze that, so we would continue to do that. And then reducing, expenditures in some areas to make sure that they don't exceed, state-provided revenues for those specific funding areas. When we look, just in general, and Bill alluded to this, when we talk about expenditure reductions or budget cuts, in a public school district, if they're going to be of a significant nature, they have to involve the reduction or the cutting of positions or people. And this diagram shows that 90% of our general fund expenditures go to purchase services, salary and benefits. Typically in a school district, if you contract for busing services, we spend about 80% of our general fund expenditures on people. Our largest group, if we take out of that 100% of total general fund expenditures, roughly about 60% goes to teachers in terms of salary and benefits, and 20% to all the rest that support staff, administration, and people. Districts that provide their own transportation, typically about 5% of the budget goes to that. For us, that's a contracted service. And one other consideration for the school board, when we go back to those three choices, cut expenditures, increase revenue, which is the only real path, an operating levy is the only real path to increasing revenue, or a combination of both. There exists a somewhat unique opportunity for what would ultimately be considered a tax-neutral operating levy. In their next calendar year, the year 2026, we are, as a community, our taxpayers will have paid off some of our construction debt, for the building of buildings. We've got about $5.16 million of taxes coming off the tax rolls in calendar year 2026. If an operating levy were to be approved by the voters on November 4th of 2025, it would generate $5 million in new revenue by shifting the community taxes from paying for the construction debt that they had been paying in calendar year 2025 to paying for operating expenses in 2026. And this is where I turn it back to Bill in a minute, but I want to give Bill and his finance team and the school board, pay them a great compliment. This is a diagram that shows the structure of our debt for our district, our primarily construction debt. And you'll go, wow, that is really neatly organized, and it is. I've been here almost 7 years. 8 years ago, it was not neatly organized. The other thing that Bill and his team have done, in addition to working through and making sure that we had a deep understanding and a well-organized debt structure, is they have renewed many, if not all, of our loans at some point over the last 5 years or so. and have saved the taxpayers of our community by refinancing, similar to refinancing a home mortgage from a higher interest rate to a lower interest rate. We've done that as a school district under Bill's leadership, and we have saved the taxpayers a total of over $8 million by doing that. And I mentioned, we've saved the taxpayers. The benefit of that refinancing the loan, none of that benefit comes directly to the school. We don't get any of that savings. That is all 100% of that. When we refinance our loan rates like that, it means less in taxes for our community. So again, I think it's another example of really working hard to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Okay, so on the next slide, this is basically just a visual representation of what Dr. Edmond was mentioning before. There's a lot going on here, but for purposes of our conversation, I'd like to focus on a few of the numbers. The way that this reads is looking at tax impacts of different classifications of property. And so you can see in blue is residential homestead. We have commercial industrial, apartments, and then agricultural on the bottom, agricultural homestead. For purposes of our conversation tonight, we will really focus in on the residential homestead, specifically highlighted in yellow, the residential homestead market value at about $400,000. So that is to say, a home valued at about $400,000. And you can see on the top, reading from left to right, Dr. Edmond mentioned we are paying off $5.16 million of our current bond debt, and so that would be money that is coming off of the tax rolls. And so going from left to right, if it was decided that a new operating referendum was to go in place, and it would be tax neutral, the amount would be approximately $620 per pupil. And you can see that on the top row. Referendum increase per pupil would be about $620. And then in order to get that calculation of the $5 million, we take into account our estimated pupil units, which is a way that the State Department of Education counts students for fiscal 27, which would generate a referendum revenue increase of $5,052. And you can see then down below on a residential home valued at $400,000, the decrease per year of paying off that bond debt in calendar year 2026 is a negative 209. That is to say, your school portion of property taxes attributed to the debt service levy in calendar year 2026 on a $400,000 home would decrease by $209. We would then seek to backfill that with a $620 per pupil operating levy and increase the taxes by $209, such that the net increase of the debt service levy decrease and the general fund increase is zero, a tax neutral operating levy. And as Dr. Edmond mentioned, essentially what we're doing here is shifting the taxes from the debt service levy, because we would be paying off those bonds, and moving the taxes into the classroom for ongoing operations starting in fiscal year 2020. Another conversation, another opportunity that we would have would be the idea of going to the cap. Okay, so there are a number of school districts, when Dr. Edmond showed our comparison districts from a revenue standpoint, that are at the state-approved operating levy cap. And that cap changes every year at the end of June, the cap projection for next year. And so currently we're not at the cap. Even with that $620 per pupil, we would not quite be to the state-approved cap as it sits today. And so this analysis looks at what would the potential tax, what would the tax impact be if we sought to go ahead for the cap. And you can see on the far right, the additional, which would amount to most likely question 2, to reach the cap would be an additional $288 per pupil. Okay? The same pupil units, obviously as would be in question 1, would generate an additional $2,322,605, and the tax impact on a $400,000 home would be $97 per year. So, just to sum this all up, the taxes on a $400,000 home, because we're paying off that debt service levy, are going down by $209 in calendar year 2026. If question 1 was on the ballot, it would backfill that with that same $209 such that it would be a tax neutral operating levy. If question 2 was approved, seeking to go to the state approved cap, which a number of our comparison districts are at, the overall tax impact for question 1 and 2 on a $400,000 home would be an additional $97 per year.
And before I flip to the next slide for you, I do want to make sure that we understand what we're sharing here. These are ideas under consideration. Nothing's been decided. At this point, everything is on the table. And again, it all goes back to whether it's budget cuts, increasing revenue, or a combination of both. And so this is more just answering questions that have been raised on our journey thus far as we look to try to figure out what is the best path forward for Shakopee Public Schools when it comes to finances.
Okay, and then lastly, we get back to the what-if comparison that was showed earlier in the presentation. And so this what-if comparison shows our same 11 comparison districts and where Shakopee would be if the voters approved an additional operating levy adding $620 per pupil to the current levy. In other words, the tax-neutral operating levy that we referred to earlier. So the operating levy per pupil then would increase to $1,980, which is the sum of the current operating levy plus the $620 additional. The operating levy annual revenue for fiscal 27 would be $15.8 million. We're still in that QComp revenue situation where we're the only one that doesn't have that QComp revenue. And obviously then the total annual revenue is $15.8 million. So that helps. You can see where we are in comparison to our comparable districts and where they are at today, right? Who knows what's going to happen moving forward. And then lastly, we do the same comparison if the decision was made to ask the voters to go to the cap. In other words, the additional $288 per pupil, bringing the district to the state maximum or cap. We would increase to $2,280 if that was approved. Our operating levy annual revenue would increase to $18.22 million. Obviously the QComp situation, and so our total annual revenue is $18.22 million. Again, we jump ahead a little bit, but we're by nowhere near the top of our 11 comparison districts. So that's a visual representation not only of the tax impact, but also how we would compare to the 11 comparison districts that we often compare ourselves to.
And again, we're focusing primarily on the 26-27 school year. We're certainly, whatever we do for 26-27 impacts fiscal 28, fiscal 29 and beyond. And certainly, we're always looking out into the future, and that's part of the consideration as well for the school board and district leadership. This is, if it's okay with Chair Smith, we're just going to move on to agenda item number 5, which are questions from the audience or the board pertaining to our district's financial outlook.
So when it comes to talking about potentially, not filling those teacher positions that you think will likely be cut, what constitutes a position being likely to be cut in district size?
The question was, what constitutes a position likely to be cut? And actually, those were positions within our learning, teaching, and equity department that were going to be district-wide and going to provide support more in the area of kind of professional learning, development, and those type of things. And it's that picture when you look out and you go, we have a $7 to $9 million budget challenge in school year 26-27. They're positions that we know would provide value, but we also know when we take a really serious look at that $7 to $9 million deficit being projected, that those new positions would likely to be rescinded a year from now. And so we decided the prudent path was not to move forward, that it made sense to save, I think on the slide it was roughly, approximately $250,000. If we save $250,000 next school year, that's $250,000 in a fund balance moving forward, knowing that we still have a lot of work to do on the $7 to $9 million, but it just seemed, I continue to use that word prudent, and I think it's absolutely that, and it's responsible.
One more.
Sure.
Have you had a chance to look at any other districts that have faced similar issues of this scope in the past, and maybe look at their examples of success they've had any?
Sorry, will you say the last part?
If there are any districts that have had, stories of success navigating similar budget issues, have you had a chance to look to those yet? Kind of ask around.
Yeah, the question is, do we spend time, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, and do we spend time looking at other districts and how they have handled or are handling similar situations? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we actually spend a great deal of time, how do people manage that? What caused that? What are the shortfalls? What are the priorities in different communities? In one district I worked at as a principal, getting to be a while ago now, we had a lot of practice in that district. We made significant budget cuts for an extended period of time, and there were things on the list that after a while, it's everything on a budget cut list in a public school district is providing value. It typically involves people, so all of those cuts are hard. In that district, it was really, really unpleasant work, but also in my current role and other leadership roles prior to this, in an odd way, it was really important training for this may sound odd, but how do you take care of budget challenges in a responsible, professional, high-quality, thoughtful manner? And that's really, really important work. Nobody goes into education to do that work, but unfortunately, when state funding doesn't keep pace with inflation, we're forced to make those tough choices. And so I have great confidence in our school board, our district leadership, and the rest of our school district to do, when faced with these challenges, we will work very hard to make what we think are the best decisions, do that in a very transparent, open way, and continue to move forward and ultimately never take our sight off of doing the absolute best we can to serve students in our community, no matter what the financial situation is. So thank you for the question. Yes, Jake.
Does it have to be a question? Can it just be comment?
I don't know, we have a public comment setting up, but no, I'm okay if, I'm gonna look at the board chair, how's that? Are we okay with that?
As long as it's relevant to our topic tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Jake Cruising, Shakopee resident. I have 2 students in the district. I went to middle school for one more day, high school in the fall. So just 2 comments. One, in appreciation of the level of transparency. Putting your budget and what you have now, what you believe to the future state, up on the screen, out there for everybody to see, speaks volumes to how this district operates now. And as a parent, I'm a taxpayer, I'm very grateful for that. From school eventual, working with them, up to this open conversation, that gives me a lot of confidence as a resident here. Second thing, I'm so grateful for the unique opportunity to present with the technology levy coming off, the possibility for an operating levy that would not only address your known budget issue, but proactively put the district in a position to withstand the unknowns in fiscal year 28, 29, 30, and beyond. Again, as a parent and taxpayer, I appreciate the transparency and the forethought, and I hope district leadership and the school board will seriously consider the options that we lead out here for that operating.
Thank you, and I messed up. I should have had Jake come up and use the microphone for public comment, so if as we move forward, when we're doing the public comment, or when we're doing public comment, I'll make that correction. I apologize for that.
Dr. Edmond, if I could, just one, so well said. We use so many terms, and because there's some technology staff here, it's the debt service levy that's decreasing, not the capital projects levy. Other than that, it was spot on.
Just one more question.
Hey, you said that last time.
Yeah, I promise it's the last one. How much are the mandates from the last omnibus bill passed at the state level contributing to these budget issues?
I think and I'm going to give Bill a little time to think. I don't know that we're going to have that dollar figure off the top of our head. That's a really complicated question. In legislative year 2023.
You want to repeat the question?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the question was, how much are the legislative mandates from, I believe, 2023 legislature impacting or exacerbating this budget challenge? Is that fair enough? And that's a really complex question because there was a lot of work done by the 2023 legislature. If we take, the mandates away, there were significant increases in the special education cross subsidy. There was, I believe, there was a decent per pupil formula increase that year. And there were a number of other pieces of things where programming, some things that great value to school districts, but also, there was some increase in costs moving forward. And so that is not the major factor. The major factor would be that diagram we showed of, the main part of state aid, which Bill alluded to, that per pupil general allowance, just simply not keeping pace with inflation. And certainly there are some areas where our costs went up due to those mandates, but that is not a major driving factor. It would be a smaller factor. Is that, please help.
No, I think you hit on that.
And that was a great question, by the way. Yeah, you can ask questions.
I got a quick one for you, Dr. Edmond. So the tax neutral, one of the scenarios that we presented tonight was a tax neutral levy of approximately $5 million and $3 million of budget cuts to solve the current situation. If we went to the second proposal of the cap, an additional $2.2 million, was it safe to say, or just fair to say, that would reduce our need to go from a $3 million budget cut to something like 0 to 1.5 million, depending on enrollment? Or
I think that would be a discussion for the board to have, because we still have that 1 to 4 million in the following year. I'm going to mix my years up. The 27-28 school year to take a look at, and also what we were, if there were any specific targets that we might choose to use, let's say the question 2, the $288 per pupil. But it certainly provides more in the way of operating revenue, which gives us flexibility in terms of how we attack the challenges and solve the problems. You are going to ask a question or have a comment. Great.
I was just going to add on to what you said. I think flexibility is the key word. I think, going back to the previous question, there are so many moving parts to what's gone on at the state level. And for example, funding to cover unemployment benefits was extended, therefore it's not impacting our budget, but it could in the future. We also are still lacking clarity at a federal level that could play into it. So I think the whole piece about a second question would be, it would just put us in a more flexible position and more able to respond to what I see as just a rapidly evolving situation.
And that's Jim McCloskey, our Assistant Superintendent, by the way, not previously introduced to me, so I want to make sure to do that. Christy?
I've got a lot of scribble notes, so more of them are comments than anything, but I just want to address a couple of things. The index for inflation, I think that's been really, really helpful for school districts across the state. It allows us some flexibility in our planning and our budgeting, knowing what that number is going to be, because I think that number is determined in February of every year, if I'm correct, something like that. But I don't think that, if you look historically at what the increases in the general aid or increases in the formula have been, I don't think that the intent was to just have the inflation index and not have the additional increases on the formula. If you look at the chart that you presented with the rapidly expanded gap in the inflation and what our per pupil funding is from the state, you're not going to reduce it if you don't continue to put that additional increase in percentage on the formula. If you just give us the inflation index, that's not going to help school districts across the state. So I think that's a really good point to make that might have been missed, because I know just with stuff that I've been working on at the Capitol a couple years ago when this came up, that was not the intent, that was going to be a replacement, that was going to be in addition to, but now we're in the financial situation that we're in, and now it's a replacement. So that hurts us. If it's historically been 2% on the formula, and if we would have had the 2.74% on top of the 2%, that's almost 5% increase, and school districts may not be making the cuts today if we would have had that. So that's just one point to think about. The other thing I wanted to bring up is QComp. I don't know how many people follow along with what's going on at the Capitol, but QComp actually was on that program it was actually on the chopping block in the governor and the Senate's education budget proposals. And so that would have removed it from every school district. It would have been phased out. But we did have some support from our local representatives to get us off the wait list. And we've been working on that for a few years now to get us off that wait list, because we know that is a competitive disadvantage to us, as the charts show, against our other comparable districts. And I also know that the School Board Association did a lot of work to try to get that wait list removed for this year. But it's hard to do that when it's on the chopping block and other people's budgets. And then lastly...
Christy, could I add one thing there? Yep. Just with QComp, I would even add, last legislative session, we actually had folks from our school district testify in front of education committees. And I think there's general acceptance of, we have an arbitrary line that determines funding for some school districts if you happen to have applied before that line was put in place. And then a whole bunch of other districts like us that don't have access to that, that quality compensation, that QComp funding. And our local legislators have been very supportive of that. And I think your point of, with this year's legislative session, I know they're still willing to support that, but in terms of all the other work being done this year, it just really wasn't ever a real possibility. But certainly, Assuming QComp is still around, which it looks like it's going to be, we will continue to work with our local legislators and others to try to get that line moved so that any school district that wants to apply for that funding, including Shakopee, can do so.
And I think the last thing that I want to bring up, just as something for the board to think about as we grapple with this decision that needs to be made soon. The last slide that talked about the future projections, so I think that's 28 and 29 and beyond. I know we're focusing not on those years, but with state funding projections for those years show that there's going to be nearly a $1 billion decrease. I think it's close to $500 million in education funding for those out years, which would be, you hear tails or the next biennium. And with what 250,000, I think, earmarked to be cut out of special education. And that's, again, our most vulnerable students. So while we're focused on, a couple of years out and the cuts that have to be made, I don't think we can ignore the potential of what devastation could be happening 2 years later and 3 years later if that second biennium, if those cuts really are made. So I just want the board to think about that. Obviously, nothing's been approved at the Capitol yet. I think the education bill is going to go through the way it's presented right now, the way it sounds, but they're all big pieces to the puzzle, and that makes this decision pretty, I guess, maybe easy to make as far as what we might need to do and ask our community, but I know we have a lot more discussions to make and have in regards to this topic before that decision is made, but there's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Chair Smith, if it's okay, I'm going to try to see if anybody wants to do the public comment part of this. Just, we had that as an agenda item, and if anybody wanted to, you're welcome to come up to the microphone and introduce yourself. If you just wanted to, in essence, share one directional comments for the board and district leadership, I wanted to make sure that we're asking if anybody wanted to do that. And then I'm okay, and I'm sure Bill's okay if you want to continue to kind of discussion, or if there are any other questions from the audience, we certainly happy to do that as well.
I did have a question, Dr. Redmond. So if we go the operating levy direction, what other positions could be supported from the funds besides positions of teachers? Are we looking at potential counselor ads, janitorial staff, admin?
Sorry, Shawnee, I want to make sure I understand the question. And tell me if I don't have it right. If we approved an operating levy, are we talking the 620 per pupil for, which is about 5 million on top of 3 million in cuts?
Yep.
Yeah. I think that would, and it's why we talked about that gap earlier. It's a great question. That difference just, in terms of our main funding per pupil funding and inflation over the last 5 years is now a $6.6 million. It's expanded by $6.6 million, or the gap is up to that much per year. So what that would do by making those cuts and adjustments, and some of those are, the enrollment adjusted things that we do anyhow, that would, in essence, allow us to continue to provide the level of services that we're doing today. Because otherwise, we have that $7 to $9 million shortfall projected for 26, 27. The 3 million in cuts plus the 5 million from an operating levy hits right in the middle of that. And that projection would then say that our district, our class sizes, our transportation routes, all those pieces could be left in place. We certainly, I think, with an eye to the future, might look for, some, possibly other reductions in other areas or greater efficiencies like the Schoolie Mitchell. But in essence, that allows us to continue to offer the level of programming that we're currently offering. Did I nail that? Yeah, thank you.
I'll just add, this is the last opportunity to interact with Dr. Redmond and Bill Benazzi, the finance director. When we get into public comment, that's going to be a one-way. If there anybody wanted to do that, it didn't sound like anybody did, but that's one way to the board. And then we're going to conclude the meeting after that. So just want to make sure everybody knew there weren't like exciting things ahead. We're getting close to the end here. So if you have questions, please ask them.
I would just, applaud and thank the board for the idea to do this. I think, again, this is a special school board meeting. We've not done one quite like this. I've been here nearly 7 years. And I think ultimately the goal is we want to connect with the community. We want to talk about, where we're at in terms of our financial outlook. And I know the board is incredibly committed to listening to the community, to understanding the challenges deeply, to weighing, really all the plausible or potential solutions, and ultimately, trying to make the best decisions. There's timeliness in terms of some of these pieces. The June 23rd meeting coming up, the school board meeting, in some ways is the date, really the final date, other than if we had a special board meeting in July. But the final date, if the board were to choose to put some form of an operating levy on the ballot for November 4th of this year. So we've been doing different financial updates and discussions at our board meetings. Again, I just think, great idea. And I appreciate the effort of the board and the folks who are here this evening. This is something really important, and it's, I know that everybody in this room feels like, hey, it's worth giving up some free time on a beautiful Wednesday evening. So I just appreciate the effort and the opportunity for Bill and I to attempt to share information as best we can and try to help people understand our financial challenges moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Edmond. Since we have nobody indicate that they wish to participate in public comment, I am going to move on to the next item on the agenda. That's item 7, upcoming meetings and important dates. While that's happening, I hope everybody knows that high school graduation is this Saturday, so that's going to be at Grace in Eden Prairie, and we're all looking forward to that. It's one of the favorite things we do as school board members to participate and see our the work of all our teachers over E through 12 and the great adults we're sending out into the world and get to hand out diplomas. Just one of the best things we get to do as school board members. And you can see some other items up on the board there. And then, this agenda is online. You can click through and look at those items as well. Is there anything anybody else would like to bring attention to for upcoming meetings and events?
I would just add TLC graduation tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Takata Learning Center tomorrow morning. Thank you for bringing that up, Jim. It's also a great event to participate in. And that's at their school location near the district office.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Peterson, a second by Brophy. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.